Hello everyone, welcome back to part 2 of this series. For this video, we're going to be setting up stats and classes. Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of my Patreon supporters for the amazing support. We're going to do some cool stuff today when it comes to stats and attributes. We're going to have stats impact damage output, damage received in a way that I've actually never covered in videos before. So we'll actually be using some calculations here, some formulas. So pretty awesome stuff. It's quite interesting. It's also necessary as the Souls games are, filled with loads of different stats. So what we're going to do first is we're just going to be creating them. And, I'll explain why we're using every single one of these as well, just to explain the point of them. Now, we will just be using the same naming convention. If that's something you don't want to do, and I'm using Dark Souls 3 here as an example, you can change the names to whatever. That's completely up to you. But just to, show the similarity, I thought it made sense to just use the same conventions. So first off, we do have a couple of basic stats if you have stats examples installed. If you don't have stats examples installed, please do that now first. The reason for that is that experience level, next level, and vitality are all in there. They're good formulas, and I just don't see the point in changing those. They're good as is. Now, I did remove everything else simply because I want to make sure it's all kept as simple as possible. There's literally just no reason to complicate certain things. So just remove everything else. And when it comes to the attributes, we have health and mana. We can change those a bit later, but we're going to start off with the stats themselves. So in order to explain a bit how stats work in Game Creator, stats are all just based on formulas, and if need be, attributes can then rely on a stat, and that's it. They can just rely on a stat. Now, first thing I'm going to do, just put this to 1 for now. Keep it simple. And we have experience level and next level. And vitality, of course. Now, when it comes to vitality, this is the base formula. This is the one we'll be using most of the time. When it comes to experience level and next level, I'll briefly show you what they actually do, why they're different, as it's quite interesting. So we have vitality here, and this is just a base, just a base formula. The reason I call it a base formula is if we create a new one here, it's literally exactly the same. Now, I'm already going to name this one just so we have it. So it's going to be attunement, which is going to be used for spells. So basically for what traditionally would be mana in this case. So we're going to be using attunement as a stat. So we can create that in a bit, but as you can see, attunement and vitality are literally just the same. When it comes to the formula, they're as simple as can be. Now, when it comes to the rest of them, when we have a look at experience, for example, you'll see that it's the same case. So experience is the same simple formula. But then it becomes interesting when we have a look at level. And what this actually does is literally explained here. So we have the table, then we have the stat, and the stat is based on experience. So it's based on this stat. And then next level is, as you can see, explained as well. So next level and level all rely on experience. And yeah, that's pretty cool. We won't be needing that too much, as most of what we'll be doing is actually going to be formulas translated in variables, and I'll leave that for in a bit. So what we're going to do first is we just created attunement, and we'll be needing that, obviously. Yeah, we can just use, call it mana. And there we go. And we just need to drag in that formula. And that's it. You know, we have the base formula. Now, when it comes to base values, obviously this is going to be, you know, an interesting thing. So what will we use as a base value? In this case, for the base value, I'll be using 30. This is something we can change for each class. So we can just, you know, keep it as is. So actually, let's just put it as 100. We'll all put everything at 100, and then when it comes to the actual classes, we can change the values. Now, the reason I don't want to impact attributes is because when you will see that with a lot of the mechanics we'll be using, it's actually just really annoying if the current value isn't at a maximum. It will just cause a lot of issues, really. So it actually makes more sense to just keep those at a maximum, and the actual stat value is the one that changes a lot. So next up, so we have attunement, and we're going to do the same here for endurance. Strength. Oh, sorry about that. Mixing it up. Maximum amount of stamina. There we go. And we'll need a formula for that. And if I'm right, no, and dexterity is different. Well, we'll just create a new one for that as well. Or is wisdom? Yes, wisdom is the same. So we'll just rename that just to avoid any confusion. So we have endurance, and there we go. So when it comes to endurance, endurance is going to impact stamina, a couple of other things as well. So we'll need to actually create that attribute of stamina. So stamina. Not sure which one would make more sense, but yeah. And yeah, we'll be using endurance. For mana, we'll be using attunement. And yeah, that's it. Then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create strength. So in traditional Dark Souls or Soul Spirit, basically strength is going to be having an impact it's going to impact your ability to do a lot of damage with heavy weapons and equip heavy weapons based on ratings. So I'm sorry, I always do this. I always mix up those TH. Sorry about that. There we go. So we'll need one for that as well. Now, I'm aware there's a lot more you can do with these formulas, but when it comes to these simple stats, there's literally no need to make it more complicated. Based on how you're going to be using these stats. So in our case, these stats are going to have a impact mostly on actual variables, not so much on anything else. So the variables will actually be impacted by these stats. So I'll just continue with a couple of others, and then we'll move on. So dexterity does the same as strength, but it does it for light weapons. And what I'm going to do is we already have dexterity. So I'm just going to change the formula. It's the easiest way. When it comes to color coding, by the way, we're not going to use that system of color coding, so we can just leave it all gray. It's not something we'll use at all. So yeah, then we have dexterity as well, and we're going to do resistance. So resistance is actually one of the most interesting stats we're going to use. So resistance is going to show your defense, your physical defense, and this will actually change the way damage of NPCs on the player works. And this is going to be really fun to do because this is actually going to be something I've never done in videos before. So if you're not familiar with it either, how to do formulas for variables, it's quite fun actually. It's something new at least. So yeah, res. And then we have the last one, we have intelligence. So intelligence is the same as strength and dexterity really, but then for magic, it's just pretty much does the same. But just for magic. And I know, some of you will be big Dark Souls fan. You'll be like, oh, all of these things impact a lot of little other things as well. And that's completely true. I'm not going to deny that. But, there are some things that are really interesting to do and some others just aren't, in my opinion. And if you think that you should be adding those effects as well, you can, do so yourself. Now, when it comes to a lot of these stats, you might want to keep it a bit simpler. For my own game, I do keep things a bit simpler than this. But part of a Souls game is actually, having all of these stats, having them impact so many different things, and it's quite an integral part of it. Now, there's two other stats as well, of course. So we have faith and humanity that are, used in the Souls games. This tutorial series is not going to have a multiplayer component. The whole faith humanity thing, especially faith, has always been a bit of a weird one. So it's for talismans and magic defense. I'm just going to keep that in resistance. If you do want to keep that separate, please do. When it comes to humanity, I'm not going to be using that either. If you want to add that system of humanity, which is incredibly specific to the actual Dark Souls games, so not so much Souls games in general, you can do that. I just don't really see the point of it unless you really want to literally copy Dark Souls, which I don't want to do. Cool. So again, the goal of this is to create a Souls game, not literally copy Dark Souls. So yeah. So we have health, mana, and stamina. Now, when it comes to stamina or endurance, at least in Dark Souls, that stat allows you to change equip load as well, which is displayed as a separate value. We are going to use equip load. We're just not going to make a literal attribute of it because we don't need to do that in this case, which is quite good. Obviously, it will impact equip load in a way, at least the inventory, but we're not going to use it in the exact same way. Cool. Then when it comes to a lot of the other attributes, we'll actually be using variables for that. So not so much literal attributes from the stats module. So yeah, let's have a look and a stab at what we'll be using this for. So variables. Now variables is going to be incredibly important. We are going to enter a lot of base values here. These values we can have impacted by difficulty level selected, for example, which I'll show how to do as well, because I think that is pretty cool. And yeah, yeah, that's pretty much it. So we're going to start off with NPC attack basic. So NPC attack basic literally is going to be the damage the NPC does on the player. And this is going to be basically their attack rating. And the reason I say that is it's really quite important to say that it is their attack rating. So it's not the literal damage they're going to output on the player, because that literal damage output on the player is going to be impacted by our resistance rating. So we have our resistance rating, which is going to be defense. So we're going to have those values as well. Now, for the first time as well, something I never really did, but it will keep things a bit cleaner, is we're going to have different tags here that we'll use. So we'll have NPC, let's just start with player, and NPC. And we'll do NPC red and player blue. There we go. So nothing, this is going to impact NPCs. Then the next one is going to be player defense basic. And there we go, that's going to be a player stat. And then we're going to have a NPC again, sorry. NPC damage basic. There we go. And that's going to be NPC, so we can group those together. So basically this value is going to be, and I'll actually keep it lower for that. So this value is going to be defined by these two combined. So I'm going to give a start value of 200. So that's, so 200, that's going to be the value of the attack, and we can change those numbers later. Again, this can also be impacted by difficulty level, things like that. So lower difficulty, you can just have the basic attack rating be lower, meaning that you'll receive less damage from the NPCs without them, without having to mess with too many different stats. Then we're going to have player defense basic. So for a base value, we can just use 30, for example. And NPC damage basic is going to be 0. So we're just going to keep that at 0 because we're going to create a formula for that to calculate this value. Now, the reason I did basic is because you can also add a magic variant of this. So if they use, for example, magic damage on you. Now, because I decided not to do the whole separate values for like faith, for example, I will keep it this simple. If you choose to do that as well, just, duplicate those values and create them, call them magic. So if you want to keep it a bit more complex and you want to have different stats for both magic resistance and normal resistance, then you basically need to duplicate what we're going to do here. Now, to make things more interesting, we don't actually need to define this at all. So this value is going to be defined by our stats. Now, because we didn't set that yet, let's do that first. So resistance, and I'm going to do a base value here of 30. And the value you choose here, that's completely up to you. In a bit, I will explain the actual impact of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to have our variables open here, and we're going to create a new scene. Now, this scene will become our test scene. In order to make the hierarchy a bit more simple to use, I'm going to change the naming here. We'll create a new scene, and this is going to be our test scene. And the reason I say test is because basically this is going to be the scene where we'll put all of our mechanics our player or everything. We're going to build it out before we actually create a normal scene of, the actual level. So this is going to be where we'll test everything. So let's create a plane here. And we'll make it a bit bigger, 10 by, well, let's just do 100 by 100. Perfect. We're also going to be creating a player, and no, we're not setting that up at all yet, so it's just going to be our default robot here. But that's because we do need a player with an actual stats component in order for the following to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to be defining the actual damage output NPCs do on the player in the actual in formulas, pretty much. So let's have some light here as well. There we go. So we're going to go to preferences again, and right now what we're going to do is we're going to define these values with stats and a formula. So let's create a trigger here. There we go. We're going to call this onStart trigger just so we can easily find its purpose. So this is the onStart trigger. We don't need a collider, so I'm just going to remove that. And we're going to input some actions. So the first action here is going to be a sync action. So we'll do sync stat to variable. So the player stat of resistance is going to be synced to the player defense basic. We're going to add a small wait just to make sure it actually has time to properly sync. And yeah, this wait is incredibly small, so it will be so fast, but it's just to separate the two from taking place. Then next up, we're going to have a math expression, and this expression is basically the math formula. So the result of this formula is going to be decided by these two. So the order might seem a bit weird, but yeah, that's how it works. So what we want, the result is going to be damage basic. So we want, this is going to be the result. The first variable is going to be our attack rating. And the second is going to be the player defense rating. Now, because our resistance has become a variable here, and they're going to be, kept in sync, we have all of these two values. So what we're going to do now is we're going to create a formula. Now, the basic formula would just be attack rating minus defense rating. The problem with this is scalability. It makes it really difficult to scale, because basically if player defense basic would be 200, we're immortal, we're not receiving any damage anymore. And that's quite difficult to keep in mind all the time when you're messing around with these stats. It's just difficult to scale, so we're going to completely avoid all of that. So we're going to make sure that defense actually has an impact, but that the formula is a bit more complex, just to make sure that we can never become truly immortal. So we're going to do, we're going to pick the first one. So the first value is NPC attack basic. So that's the attack rating of a 200. We're going to multiply that, and we're going to multiply that by 800 divided by 800 plus defense rating. Make sure to use the proper brackets, and then there we go. Now, in case you're wondering, how did I figure this out? I didn't. I looked up how these types of formulas generally work. I got some help for that as well, on some good articles that help you explain how to do stats the best way. And sometimes it's just really worth looking into that. And defense rating is often deemed as problematic. On a lot of Dark Souls fans even think that the entire endurance rating, the entire resistance rating is hardly even worth it because it doesn't do that much, and we want it to have some value, but we don't want it to be overpowered either. So that's why we're doing this. Now, you might run into the risk that, just like in the Dark Souls actual games, just upping vitality like crazy will have more of an effect. And that's true, it's really hard to, avoid that. But we'll do our best to make defense rating actually really interesting. So this formula is going to have an effect, and let's actually see what that is. So again, we put the stat value for resistance at 30. So that will make this 30 as well, because that just synced. So it's literally just going to copy over that value. And then when it comes to NPC damage basic, it's going to be calculated based on those two. Now we're going to play around with those values as well, just to show you what I meant with, you can't really become immortal. There we go. So as you can see, now we have the damage output being influenced by defense basic or by resistance. And this is the actual damage they'll deal. And now I'm going to close that. I'll change resistance to 200, for example. And we'll go back to our variables. And we'll have a defense rating of 200 matching our attack rating. And as you can see, we're dealing a lot less damage. Well, the NPCs are, at least. So that's really cool. That's really awesome. That makes it incredibly useful. But we're not becoming immortal, which obviously would be a problem. Now, the nice thing here when it comes to scalability is that I haven't tested this, so let's see what is actually going to happen. And there we go. So again, loads less damage, and yes, in comparison, this is a lot less, but no immortality going on here. So that makes defense rating a lot more interesting to actually set up, makes it a lot more useful. Now for dexterity and strength, I am going to use really basic formulas I just discussed regarding defense. And the reason for that is that in these types of games, once you are strong enough and you're really strong, yes, it's actually normal to be able to one-hit low-level enemies. So there's nothing weird about that. So that's good for us. Keeps things really interesting. So what we're going to do is we're going to just create a couple of variables here. So we'll have player attack basic. We'll have player strength. And we'll have player dexterity. There we go. And in order to get those, those outcomes, we are going to use two separate ones here. So we'll have player damage strength. So if we're using a heavy weapon, and we're going to have player damage dex, and we can actually just keep these short. There's no reason to spell it out completely. We get it. And there we go. So yeah, just the basic things here. So we're going to and player as well, and player as well. So this will keep simple. So we're just going to be doing another two syncs here. So we'll sync strength to strength, and we're going to sync dexterity to dexterity. So we'll just get these values. We don't need to enter anything here. And then we're going to do really simple math expressions. So the outcome is player damage strength for the heavy weapons is just going to be 1 plus 2. And yes, if you want to create a more complicated formula, you know how to do it. We can't literally use the same thing, of course. but I don't really see the point in that because, as I mentioned before, if you're really leveled up, you want to be able to one-hit low-level enemies. I mean, that's kind of the point. So we'll have, for those, we'll use player attack basic, and we'll use strength. And then we'll duplicate this one and we'll use damage dexterity with player dexterity. Now, I didn't set any values for this, so just for the sake of it, I'm just going to do 15 and 15. There we go. Just so we have something, you know. And now when I'm going to hit play, we'll get these values. But we first need to make sure, of course, we do have some basic attack rating as well. So for the player basic attack, let's pick the same 200. And again, the advantage of this at least is that when it comes to the basic attack ratings, these are just simple things you can influence with difficulty levels. Same with the attack rating for NPCs, without having to mess completely with all of the stats and attributes. Messing up the entire system pretty much. So this is a rather easy way to control that. I'm not gonna say it's absolutely perfect, but it's a good system and it makes it quite easy to do so. And there we have our values. Obviously nothing all too exciting because it's just a basic plus. But it does allow us to, once we go to our upgrade screen, it does allow us to really play along with these strength and dexterity values without them being too exaggerated compared to the other values we'll be using for stats. So again, it's not all that interesting in this case because this is just really simple. But yeah, it's incredibly useful. Cool. So there we have, a lot of our basic stats here. Now we do need to make sure that obviously some of these impact other things as well, like the weight we can carry, etc. Now, when it comes to some of these things like weight, for example, we'll do that once we actually hit the inventory part of the video, as it's not terribly interesting to do that. It's really simple, but right now it would be completely and utterly out of place as we're not doing anything with the inventory yet. So these are just a couple of the basic stats. Now, what we need are classes to basically, define these. And the classes are going to be defining the start values and some of the weapons we'll be using, but mostly actually just these stat values. Now, when it comes to classes, that's one of the things I definitely do like about the Dark Souls games, is that they don't actually matter all that much. So when it comes to the classes, they're basically just, base values for all of the stats we're using, including the default starting equipment. The nice thing, you can obviously have a better head start, but if you pick the wrong class, you can still correct this by just, building your build the way you want it. So that makes our job a lot easier as well. So when it comes to the start trigger, we're just going to be creating a couple of really simple conditions. And when it comes to the amount of classes, I will be honest, I'm going to keep things a bit simpler. I'm not going to do, like 20 different ones or 15 different ones, as there's just not much of a point in doing so, to be completely fair. We do have some impact on level as well. You can definitely set this if you want. I never really personally understood that, but I might be completely missing something. And if you do see value for that, you can just set that as well. So change the starting level the way you want it to. We're going to go through how to set this up. It's incredibly simple. So if you want to include level with that as well, we can do so. That's completely fine. So either way, we're going to set up some strings here. So we're going to have first, we're going to have night, which obviously is, just just a basic, simple one. So knight is going to be knight. There we go. Then the next one is going to be assassin. And we'll add, what will we add as well? Sorcerer, or yeah, sorcerer. And we need one more for the bow, bow part. So I'll do dual weapon, dual bladed by default. Light armor, heavy weapon, or just, shield and sword is actually better. Sorcerer, and we're going to set the last one to have a bow, which will be, I'm not really sure what that would be called. Just archer. Just going to keep it simple, archer. There we go. So when it comes to these, I'll set up a new tag as well. So we'll just call them classes. We'll also make it yellow to just simply match this. It's not much of a reason other than that, but it just makes it simpler. Now you can add a ton more to this. You can add, the amount you want. It doesn't really matter how many you want to add, as you'll basically just be replicating. You just be replicating steps really. So we're going to set up the first conditions, and this will be class conditions. And then the if value is really going to be incredibly simple. So if variable string, I made it way too complicated. So it could just be class, and sorry about that. We'll decide that here. So I made things a bit too complicated. So we'll rename the tag as well to, instead of classes, let's just do creation. So this is for the character creation part. So if class is knight, and keep in mind when it comes to the equipment, that's one step we're going to skip for now. We'll add that later, because when it comes to the equipment, that we'll do that with the whole inventory part. So when it comes to knight here, we're going to change stats, vitality, or we can do level as well, so we'll just add a default level. And we're going to just set it to 5. So we're not going to do any adds here. We're just going to set these default values. So I'll do 1000 for vitality, level 5. We'll do attunement. We'll set that to, I don't know, 10. We'll keep these values a bit low, obviously, in the beginning. There we go. Sorry about that. Attunement, we'll do endurance. We'll set that to, not clue, 50. Then we'll set strength. So for strength, I'm going to set that by default to 30. And then dexterity, for this player, dexterity is going to be set to 5, because that should be low. It's a knight. Then we'll have resistance, which should be a bit higher given his armor and all of that stuff. So we'll do, I don't know, 30. And we'll do intelligence, we'll set that to 5 as well. And again, these are just random values. You can pick whatever you want. This is all comes down to fine tuning anyway at some point. But yeah, that's it. So now we're going to add a clause. We're going to simply copy this condition. We'll change this to assassin, and we won't be creating those actions. We'll just duplicate them. We'll call these knight actions as well, just to make it, or actions knight, just to make sure that it's we can separate the two and we know which one is which. So this one will be actions assassin, and this will be sorcerer. And maybe remove assassin. There we go. And then the last one is going to be archer. And yeah, that's it. So now all we need to do is simply just, change those values. So we can close the first one, drag in assassin. So when it comes to level, I'm just going to keep everything to the 5. You can change that. When it comes to vitality, the assassin is going to be at, 800. Yeah, that's one annoying thing. Attunement, I'm going to keep that at 10. Endurance, going to keep that at, actually going to do 60. Strength is going to be 10. Dexterity is going to be 40. And intelligence is going to be 10. There we go. So you get the gist. It's basically just changing the default stats for the moment, at least. So we have sorcerer. As you might guess, the whole character creation, when we select our class, all it's going to do is literally just select a string, and that's it. It's just going to input a string into the class field, and that basically decides our stats. So we have sorcerer. Something like this. Again, please fine tune to the best of your abilities. And then we need to just add the last one, which is going to be archer. And there we go, something like this. And you can just pick whatever value you want. And there we go. So the only last quick test is simply going to be, I'm going to enter in knight here, and then on start, we're going to make sure that, let's call these clause conditions. There we go. And we'll call these values actions. We'll hit start, and let's have a look. Now the scene has started, we've selected knight, so if everything went well, we now should have these values, and we can easily determine here when it comes to strength and dexterity. So when we go to the player, player classes, we see that all of these are actually correct. I do see I actually missed one of them. So I actually missed several of them. The interesting thing here is, as far as I'm aware, these values should have been different. So when it comes to knight, we do have player strength 30, dexterity 5. So that should have actually meant that player strength, dexterity, and these are both set to the same value. That is definitely interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. It seems like these values, for some reason, Okay. So these were basically running first before impacting those. So that's good to know. So we need to make a small change there. But yeah, other than that, we're all good. This is the only thing we will need to address. So as you can see, when it comes to HP, we have 100 out of 1,000 here. And when it comes to level, it's not set at 5. So a good reason for that is because level is based on experience, so we can't just simply set it like that. So we basically need to add experience to the mix. So that's good to know. So we'll need to make a couple of small changes here. So when we have class, everything is set. We just need a small delay basically for the values actions to happen. So I'm going to duplicate this, set it here first. So hopefully that 0.1 is enough. And then when it comes to experience, that's just going to be a quick test to see how much experience we actually need in order to set that up. So when it comes to level, experience, experience, and experience. Now, in order to normally get the specific value, you'd have to try and test a bit. So in our case, 250 is actually level 5 exactly. So we're just going to be setting it to 250. It will allow us to avoid a lot of headache. And the same here, 250. There we go. Now, one of the other things that is actually really useful, because as you might have seen, we had 100 out of 1,000, and that's because that's attributes of the way they work. So one of the better ways to actually do it is by default, because we're loading this in just after start of the scene, so there's going to be a little time. So the default values are already set. Then 0.01 second later, we're actually impacted by the values we set. So the better way to go around it is actually to do the opposite here. So already set this to say 5,000. I always have to press that enter because otherwise it's not going to work. 5,000. And here do the same 5,000. Now that's incredibly high, and obviously now once we're going to hit start, all of these values will be set up correctly. So we're going to go to these two. This is still night, right? Yeah, perfect. Let me remove this. So yeah, everything should now be set up correctly. So once I'm going to hit play now, we're going to have the correct values here. So our damage because of strength is 230 and 205. So those are the correct values because those are the stats we set. And once we look at our player now, we will see all of these values being completely maxed out. So they are now maxed out at 50, 1,000, and 10. And our level is 5, with next level still being 0 because we just literally hit level 5. So that's a 250 experience. So everything is now working exactly as it should. And yeah, that's pretty perfect. So yeah, there was a bit of a longer video, but the whole stats, attribute, and variable system is quite it takes a bit of time to set up. Let's just say it like that. In the end, this will actually be quite easy to use once done. But yeah, it took a little time to set up. So thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next part of the series.